In the far reaches of the northern hemisphere, where the world seems to narrow into quiet horizons of snow and light, the Arctic stretches outward like a slow, breathing landscape. For centuries, people looked at this distant region with curiosity, wonder, and a kind of peaceful uncertainty. Tonight, we'll drift through that story, the history of Arctic exploration, in a gentle, calm, and steady way. Not a tale of peril or danger, but a soft walk through the ideas, the routines, the tools, the winter journeys, and the quiet lives shaped by the far north. So settle in, let your mind wander gently, and imagine the soft crunch of snow beneath slow footsteps, the faint glow of lanterns against pale ice, and the steady rhythm of explorers moving through a vast, quiet winter world. Long before ships ever approached the Arctic Circle, there was imagination. Ancient Greek geographers wrote about a land in the high north called Hyperborea, a calm, peaceful region beyond the cold winds, where daylight stretched endlessly. They didn't know about the Arctic, but the idea was there, a faraway landscape shaped by unusual light and long winters. Early maps often left the upper edges blank. These empty spaces weren't just uncharted, they were invitations for curiosity. By the Middle Ages, sailors along the northern coasts of Norway, Iceland, and Greenland began telling stories of drifting ice, midnight sun, and strange magnetic behaviors in their compasses. These stories were quiet beginnings, the earliest threads of exploration. But even then, the people most familiar with the Arctic were not explorers from abroad. They were the indigenous communities who had lived there for thousands of years. When we speak of Arctic exploration, we're not talking about discovering a blank land. We're really talking about outsiders slowly learning what indigenous groups already understood deeply. The Inuit, Yupik, Chukchi, Sami, and other northern peoples developed knowledge perfectly tuned to winter landscapes. Their skills weren't dramatic adventures, they were quiet, daily practices. They crafted warm clothing from animal skins, using layering techniques that many modern expedition designers still study. They built sleds that glided over snow, and snowshoes that distributed weight gently across frozen surfaces. They learned to read snow like a map, its textures, its layers, its movement across open tundra. A wind pattern across a snowdrift could hint at direction. The sound of ice underfoot could tell you whether a frozen surface was safe. And the stars, when visible, acted as a gentle guide over long, dark winter nights. Indigenous winter travel wasn't rushed. It was rhythmic, patient, and observant. The same qualities that later explorers would need to adopt if they hoped to survive or understand the Arctic. By the late 1500s and early 1600s, European countries began sailing north with a calm but determined purpose: to look for shortcuts across the top of the world. These attempts aimed to find new trade routes: the Northwest Passage across Canada and the Northeast Passage above Russia. At the time, the seas were mysterious. Explorers described the quiet cracking of ice sheets, slow drifts of fog, and long days where the sun barely dipped below the horizon. These were voyages measured not in moments of action, but in long stretches of stillness, slow movement through white landscapes, hours spent observing ice formations, and quiet nights anchored near drifting floes. Sailors kept detailed journals, notes about air temperature, ice thickness, strange magnetic readings, and sightings of seals or polar bears. These journals weren't dramatic stories. They were records of patience. Even when storms or hardships appeared, the daily routines remained calm, checking the ship's rigging, boiling simple meals, melting snow for water, measuring distance traveled. Exploration, even then, was mostly waiting and watching. Imagine the soft routine aboard a wooden ship anchored near the edge of the drifting pack ice. Morning begins not with brightness, but with a low, blue-gray glow spreading across the sky. Crew members move quietly, warming their hands near small stoves, wrapping wool scarves and fur-lined hoods around their faces. The atmosphere is slow. The ship creaks gently. Snowflakes drift sideways in a calm wind. Breakfast might be a warm porridge or a simple biscuit, small comforts against the cold. Explorers check their navigation tools, noting magnetic behavior and calculating their latitude using the faint arc of the sun. On deck, you hear almost nothing except the soft brushing of snow across wood and the distant sound of ice shifting. Some explorers sketch the landscape, capturing the smooth curves of icebergs, the dark shapes of seals resting on floes, or the soft shimmer of distant northern light. This quiet observational work became a core part of Arctic exploration, drawing, journaling, measuring, absorbing the environment slowly. Evening arrives gradually, blending into long twilight. A lantern is lit. Crew members gather in the small warmth of the cabin, discussing the day's slow progress and adjusting their plans for the next. This rhythm, slow, thoughtful, deliberate, shaped Arctic travel more than any moment of excitement ever did. To understand Arctic exploration, we also have to appreciate the simple but ingenious tools that made winter survival possible. Early explorers wore layers of wool, linen, and fur. Thick mittens, warm socks, and fur-lined boots provided insulation. Sailors wrapped scarves around their faces, frost forming where their breath met the cold air. Navigation tools included compasses, which behaved oddly near the magnetic pole, sextants, used to measure sunlight angles, chronometers, which kept track of time for calculating longitude, logs and journals filled with observation after observation. For moving across land, they used sledges, leather harnesses, and often borrowed indigenous designs for clothing, shelters, and travel methods. Occasionally, they traveled by foot using snowshoes, taking careful steps to avoid sinking into powder snow. Each tool brought explorers a little closer to understanding the Arctic's winter rhythms. Arctic exploration wasn't just about travel. It was also an early form of scientific fieldwork. Explorers studied how sea ice formed, the patterns of freeze and thaw, the behavior of magnetic fields at high latitudes, the biology of Arctic animals, the unusual changes in sunlight across seasons. During winter, the sun dipped below the horizon for long, quiet months. Explorers described the polar night as soft darkness filled with dim starlight and the gentle glow of the aurora borealis. The aurora captivated many. They described the lights as slow curtains, shimmering arcs, and ghost-like waves drifting across the sky. These observations, made in silence from ship decks or snowy camps, became some of the earliest scientific notes on polar phenomena. When ships could go no farther, many expeditions continued overland. This part of the Arctic story is surprisingly calm. Not a tale of constant hardship, but a slower routine built around patience and quiet perseverance. A typical day on an Arctic winter camp began long before sunrise. Inside a canvas tent or snowblock shelter, a small stove would be lit using carefully stored fuel. The warmth spread slowly, softening frozen clothing and making the air just comfortable enough to begin the morning tasks. Boots were warmed near the fire, mittens dried from the previous day's snow, and warm drinks prepared, often tea or a simple broth. Outside, the world remained still. Snow absorbed sound. The only movements were drifting flakes or the soft sway of a distant ice ridge. After breakfast, teams would begin preparing their sledges. Harness lines were checked, gear straps tightened, and snow packed beneath runners to reduce friction. Every task was deliberate, even peaceful. Travel across the snow wasn't fast. It was steady, rhythmic, sledges sliding forward in long, measured strides. Every hour or so, explorers paused to make notes. Temperature, wind direction, ice thickness, the shape of the horizon. These were the true milestones of the day, small entries that slowly built a record of the northern world. As daylight faded, the team would stop to build camp again. Snow blocks might be stacked into partial walls, creating shelter from the wind. A tent was set, food warmed, boots dried. Evenings were slow. A lantern glowed from the center of the tent, illuminating steam rising from metal cups. Some explorers read old journals. Some repaired clothing. Some simply listened to the quiet, broken only by the faint cracking of distant ice. In these camps, the Arctic became a companion, vast, cold, and calm. Many expeditions relied on dogs for travel, adopting methods perfected by indigenous Arctic communities. Sled dogs moved with remarkable ease across snow, their paws adapted to icy terrain. They pulled sledges with steady, consistent power, rarely rushed or frantic. Explorers wrote about the rhythmic panting of sled dogs, the soft padding of paws, the jingle of harness rings under pale Arctic light. Feeding the dogs, grooming them, and checking their paws became a peaceful, nightly ritual, a moment of connection between humans and animals sharing winter travel. The dogs contributed more than strength. They brought warmth to the camp, curling beside tents or near the entrance, offering quiet companionship amid snow and silence. By the late 1800s, Arctic exploration entered a new phase, not dramatically focused on races, but steadily centered on mapping coastlines, studying weather, and understanding magnetic fields. Many expeditions set up long-term wintering stations. These stations were simple but orderly wooden huts or prefabricated shelters, small workshops, storage rooms, and observation posts. Daily routines included measuring temperature, taking barometric readings, recording sunrise and sunset times, sketching wildlife, studying ice conditions. It was slow science, careful science, the kind that rewarded patience. Inside the wintering huts, the atmosphere was surprisingly domestic. A small stove warmed the center of the room. Clothing hung to dry from rafters. Books and journals were stacked neatly along walls. Meals simmered slowly. Stews, boiled grains, tea. Some explorers even celebrated winter holidays quietly, decorating their huts with simple, handmade ornaments, sharing stories from home, or singing softly in candlelight. These small rituals created warmth against the long Arctic night. Explorers often described the Arctic not as empty, but as subtle and changing. They wrote about the blue shadows cast across snow at midday, the shimmering reflections on sea ice, the way the horizon blurred into the sky, the strange, soft quiet that hung over the land. Many were surprised at how beautiful the Arctic could be. When the sun returned after the long winter darkness, it crawled back slowly, first appearing as a faint glow, then a thin line of gold, and finally a pale circle rising gently above the horizon. This return of light was celebrated in camp journals. Some called it one of the most peaceful moments of their lives. And throughout the year, the Arctic offered different moods. In winter, a calm, blue-gray darkness lit by lanterns and the aurora. In spring, soft meltwater, scattered cracks in the sea ice, and migrating birds. In summer, a sun that never truly sets, glowing softly across the tundra. In autumn, the first hushed snowfall that signaled winter's quiet return. Explorers became observers of these rhythms, taking notes that later helped scientists understand climate, light cycles, and wildlife behavior. Even in the cold, life continued. Explorers often encountered wildlife in gentle, unhurried scenes. Arctic foxes padded softly around camps, their winter coats blending into the snow. Their movements were light and almost playful, leaving delicate tracks in the powder. Caribou and reindeer moved in slow, deliberate herds across open tundra, their breath rising in small clouds. Snowy owls perched on ice ridges, watching with silent attention. Seals rested on ice floes, barely stirring except to stretch or slide quietly into the water. Some explorers wrote about meeting polar bears, but in calm terms, observing from a distance, noting behavior rather than conflict. These animals taught explorers how to read the Arctic environment. Their presence was a reminder that the far north, though cold, was full of life. Navigation in the Arctic wasn't fast or bold. It was careful, methodical, and deeply tied to observation. Explorers relied on stars, when visible, the faint arc of the sun, the drift of ice snow patterns shaped by wind, and the color of the sky. Indigenous knowledge played a critical role. Inuit navigators, for instance, could read snowdrifts, called sastrugi, to identify wind direction and orientation. They also memorized coastlines and landmarks through repeated seasonal travel, building mental maps far more detailed than many printed charts. This approach to navigation was meditative. It required stillness, awareness, and respect for subtle changes in the environment. And when explorers adopted this mindset, their journeys became much smoother, guided by the quiet signals the Arctic offered. After months, sometimes years, in the far north, explorers eventually began their return home. The journey back often carried a sense of reflection, not triumph, but gratitude. They brought with them journals filled with careful notes, sketches of ice and land, samples of rocks and plants, and observations of wildlife and weather. But beyond the scientific results, many carried something more subtle, a deep appreciation for winter's quiet beauty, the slow rhythm of the Arctic, the patience required to understand such a vast, calm, and ancient landscape. Their stories later inspired artists, writers, scientists, and future explorers, helping shape the world's understanding of the far north. As time moved into the 20th and 21st centuries, Arctic exploration shifted from long voyages by wooden ship to careful scientific missions supported by emerging technologies. But even with new tools, the heart of Arctic exploration remained the same: quiet observation, steady patience, and a deep respect for a winter world unlike any other. Modern researchers work from stations built along Arctic coastlines, on drifting ice platforms, or housed in sturdy structures designed to withstand long, dark winters. These stations are not loud laboratories. They are peaceful places where slow, daily routines help track the pulse of the northern world. Scientists record sea ice thickness, air temperature, the movement of glaciers, the behavior of Arctic animals, changes in snow and light. Each measurement is another small piece in a puzzle that reveals how the Arctic is changing. Expeditions today often last months at a time, with teams rotating through seasons of light and darkness. Meals are shared at long tables. Conversations quiet down as storms pass outside. Researchers step into heavy parkas before walking out onto frozen terrain to take readings beneath pale skies. For all the advanced equipment, satellites, sensors, and icebreakers, the Arctic still asks for the same qualities it always has: patience, attentiveness, and calm. Modern Arctic travel might involve icebreaker ships cutting slowly through frozen seas, their engines humming gently beneath the sound of cracking ice. But even this process is gradual, a measured pace through shifting flows and ridges. Satellites now watch the region from above, tracking sea ice movement, cloud patterns, and the surface of the frozen ocean. From space, the Arctic appears still and monochrome, a vast field of whites and blues stretching toward the pole. Airborne sensors glide above the landscape, measuring snow depth or mapping coastlines. Drones provide gentle overhead views of glaciers and frozen fjords. Despite these advancements, explorers still step onto the ice with tools not so different from those used centuries ago: notebooks, thermometers, and cameras to record light and shadow. Technology has added detail to Arctic study, but the experience remains quiet and immersive. In modern exploration, Indigenous knowledge is not just respected, it is essential. The communities who have lived in the Arctic for generations hold insights that technology alone cannot replicate. Their understanding includes how ice behaves in different temperatures, how animals migrate, where currents shift beneath sea ice, how winds sculpt snowdrifts, how weather changes can be felt long before they are seen. In recent years, partnerships between Indigenous experts and scientific researchers have become a cornerstone of Arctic work. Together, they blend traditional methods with modern tools, creating a clearer, more compassionate understanding of the far north. This collaboration reflects something that has always been true. The Arctic is not a place to conquer or discover. It is a place to learn from, patiently, humbly, and with respect. In modern exploration, Indigenous knowledge is not just respected, it is essential. The communities who have lived in the Arctic for generations hold insights that technology alone cannot replicate. Their understanding includes how ice behaves in different temperatures, how animals migrate, where currents shift beneath sea ice, how winds sculpt snowdrifts, how weather changes can be felt long before they are seen. In recent years, partnerships between Indigenous experts and scientific researchers have become a cornerstone of Arctic work. Together, they blend traditional methods with modern tools, creating a clearer, more compassionate understanding of the far north. This collaboration reflects something that has always been true. The Arctic is not a place to conquer or discover. It is a place to learn from, patiently, humbly, and with respect. The Arctic today is changing faster than many other regions of the world. But even in discussions of climate, many explorers describe the experience in calm, measured terms, observing shifts, recording patterns, and quietly sharing what they find. They note thinner sea ice, earlier melt seasons, shifts in animal migrations, changes in snow cover, warmer temperatures than journals from centuries ago recorded. These observations help scientists around the world understand global climate patterns. And though the topic is large, the way explorers gather information is still slow and peaceful, taking readings, watching the horizon, noting small changes day by day. It is the same rhythm that guided explorers centuries ago. To understand Arctic exploration fully, one must appreciate its seasonal cycles. Winter. Deep darkness, lantern glow, the aurora drifting across the sky, a landscape shaped by ice and stillness. Spring, soft light returning, meltwater forming gentle rivulets, birds arriving in quiet flocks. Summer, a sun that circles the sky without setting, tundra plants blooming in subtle colors, calm seas opening for a short time. Autumn, cooling winds, first snow, the beginning of winter's quiet return. Explorers through time have witnessed these changes with awe. Even modern scientists often pause during their work to take in the soft glow of midnight sun or the first hint of winter icing across the sea. The impact of Arctic exploration reaches far beyond maps and scientific data. Artists have painted its pale horizons. Poets have described its silence. Writers have captured the slow glow of auroras and the soft edges of glaciers. And cultures across the world have drawn inspiration from the quiet resilience of northern life. Indigenous knowledge, once overlooked, is now recognized as a key to understanding the Arctic's future. And the story of exploration has shifted from dramatic tales to something gentler and more thoughtful, a narrative of learning, observing, and respecting a powerful but peaceful environment. As our journey through Arctic exploration comes to an end, imagine once more the stillness of the far north. Picture a calm evening on a frozen coastline. The sky is a gradient of silver and blue, with a soft band of pale light hovering above the horizon. Snow stretches outward in smooth, untouched expanses. A lantern flickers gently beside a small tent, casting warm colors onto the snow. In the distance, the ice shifts with a low, muffled sound, a reminder that even in stillness, the Arctic is alive. An explorer steps outside, wrapped in layers of wool and fur. They pause for a moment, taking in the calm. Their breath drifts slowly into the cold air, disappearing into the vast space around them. This is the essence of Arctic exploration, a quiet meeting between human curiosity and a world shaped by winter. A gentle dialogue between cold landscapes and patient observers. A reminder that sometimes the most profound understanding comes not from rushing, but from stillness. And as the lantern glows softly in the Arctic dusk, the journey settles into memory, calm, reflective, and timeless.